know what really makes us mad? Is wasting money on CDs with only one or two good songs.
Yeah. Tell them about punk.
What's up, posers? Welcome to Punk Lotto Pod. I'm your co-host, Justin Hensley.
I'm your other co-host, Dylan Hensley.
And this is the show where we choose one year at random and select one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk-adjacent album from that year to discuss. And this week, we are joined by author Chris MacDonald. He is the writer of the book Days and Days, a story about Sunderland's Leatherface and the ties that bind. He's also a tattoo artist as well as a musician, and he's written another memoir, I believe, and I think he's working on some more stuff. So, yeah, this is a really fun conversation with Chris. And what are we talking about today?
We are talking about the year 2000, and we're talking about Leatherface. Apropos, we are doing their album Horsebox.
Yeah, this was somewhat of a comeback record. They had previously released the split with Hot Water Music, but this is the first full length that they released since breaking up. So, yeah, very specific period in the Leatherface history, but it actually really makes sense once our guest explains that, and we'll let him do that later on. In the meantime, if you go to patreon.com/punklautopod, you get access to all of our weekly bonus audio for only $1. And last week, what did we do?
We talked about High Fidelity in our Master Punk Theater series. It's been a little while since we've done a movie. Those usually take a little bit more time to prep for, so why they're a little more sporadic, but that felt like an easy one to do, as it is my favorite movie of all time, and certainly one that Justin and I have watched many times, so I thought it was a pretty fun conversation.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking about that movie, and the name Master Punk Theater is being increasingly less applicable to that series, because we just tend to just do movies that just have music in them more than anything.
Music focused films, or something with maybe like a lot of punk songs on the soundtrack kind of counts.
Yeah, your Repo Mans and your Return of the Living Deads versus your Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlists. Yeah. I did think we could do. There's another Nick Hornby music centric book that was turned into a movie. What is it? Juliet Naked, I think is what it's called. And that one came out sometime in the 2000s, so it's a little bit more of the iPod generation of music, but it is
Ethan Hawke and Chris O'Dowd. Yeah, I remember seeing the trailer for that. 2018?
Yeah, I think it's when the movie came out. Yeah, and the book,
Later
I think
thought.
The book came out probably like 07, 08, something like that. I remember it coming out when I was still working at Barnes & Noble. But I think it's a music focused thing. We could cover that eventually one day, maybe.
Well, we got a few years to hit 2018 since we have decided on the show to set a cutoff year of about 10 years from the present. So, because those episodes don't do well. So,
so what, 3 years from now we can finally do it?
Now. Yeah. 2018 stuff.
That is the year we first started the show too. So I guess we could maybe do it as an anniversary. Like that would be the only other cheat workaround. But yeah, I don't even know if it's any good or not. I mean, it could be terrible. But the movies we don't do them as often just because you're right. It takes a little more prep, and a lot of what we do for the bonus audio is no prep rule.
Yeah.
Which
you're prepping for the main episode, and then you got to do something extra, and
right.
It's only so much time in the week.
Yeah, I just realized this. Your camera's working, and I've been able to see you this whole time. That's a first for a long time.
Yeah, it's been off and on. It was showing it on my end yesterday, but it wasn't actually going through.
Yeah, that was very weird. I just realized that it was like, oh, that's strange. But also, if you go to our Patreon, we have a $5 tier, which is our producer/listening club tier. And for that means you get your name and whatever it is you want to promote said on the show. And let's go ahead and do that. Shout out our producers. So thank you to Dave Brown, host of the podcast One Band 5 Songs, which is currently on hiatus due to Dave going back to school, and he's finishing up his master's degree this semester. So good luck, Dave. Hopefully you'll be free of this shackles of school. Whew, it's a time eater. But also, thank you to Steve Long, host of the podcast Rebel Rock Radio, and he has a sub-series under his Radio Unfriendly banner that called Pure Rank that I literally just recorded with him right before Dylan and I are recording this intro. So I did an episode of Pure Rank where I ranked my top 5 favorite Superchunk records. So really enjoyed that conversation with Steve, and we've yet to do a Superchunk album on this show, funnily enough, but we'll get to it eventually.
They don't show on the punk charts, so we don't ever see them and remember that they came out in those specific years. It is something to consider especially whenever we're looking at a year and we're not really that excited by what's on the punk charts, picking an album to talk about. It wouldn't be a bad idea to go look at like the alt rock, indie rock, maybe even power pop charts from time to time, just because of how Rate Your Music doesn't have the same calling everything punk mentality that we have.
Yeah, right.
And I am a complete goober, and we riffed so long on the other 2 Patreon producers that I forgot to name the 3rd Patreon producer, who is Jason W., writer of the blog Songs About Chocolate and Girls. Excellent newsletter that you can check out over on the Substack. Sorry, Jason. Can't believe we forgot you.
But you also get access to the Listening Club, which is a monthly video chat where everyone in this tier can get together and talk about an album that we all agreed to listen to. And as of the release of this episode, I believe we have done our most recent one. So don't know what we're talking about yet because we haven't decided. But we are going to try and do something from 2025. There is one record that I do think we might wind up landing on unless something comes out this week that we're recording this. So we might, I won't say the name yet in case we don't do that record, but you can go back and listen to that if you missed it, and then you can join in for the next one the following month. And then for the $10 tier, you get to choose the album we devote an entire episode to. So you choose the record and we talk about it. The last one of those we did was The Gits, Frenchie the Bully, which was brought to us by our patron, Zach. So all sorts of fun stuff over there on the Patreon. And we'll do the plugs here. You can follow us on all forms of social media at punklautopod, punklautopod@gmail.com, and our voicemail line 202-688-PUNK. And if you leave a voicemail for us, we'll play it on the show, which we did last week. So thank you all so much, and enjoy this conversation with Chris MacDonald. We are joined here today by Chris MacDonald, author of the book Days and Days, a story about Sunderland's Leatherface and the ties that bind. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Thank you for doing it.
Stoked to be here.
Yeah. So I received an email about your book not too long after I became aware of it. I follow the Leatherface Bandcamp page, and I assume they got some copies of it, and then they sent on an email saying, hey, we've got copies in our store. You can order now. And I think I screenshotted it and sent it to our Discord because we have a bunch of other Leatherface fans in there. And I was like, this seems cool. Like we didn't know anything about it. And then I received an email from your PR, asking if we'd like to have you on. I was like, of course. Like we were already excited about this book before. So yeah,
it's cool.
We're real excited to have you here.
Yeah, great.
So I have a way I would describe the book, but I want to let you describe it first because you're probably more, been explaining it to people. So for the listener, how would you describe this book?
I would say it's part travelogue, part unofficial biography, atypical biography, and maybe just some insight into a band that a lot of people love.
Yeah. The way I would describe it is I would say it's like it's a travel book / memoir crossed with a band biography, crossed with like fan essays almost is like how even though you wrote them, based on other people's words, like they come across as the type of stuff that you would read in like an anniversary edition of a book, or of a record where they like have essays from musicians who are fans.
For sure.
And you get quite a few impressive names in there. Like you have Chris Wallard and Chuck Reagan from Hot Water Music in there. You have members of like Snuff and members of Tilt Wheel, like so many people, Sergi from Sam I Am, like all these like big names just kind of talking about their actual interactions with Leatherface and just being a fan.
Yeah. I mean, the band is so mysterious that there's just not a lot of information out there. I would never want to be the one to try and write an official biography of that band, but to just give people insight, and get the action, a lot of it, I wasn't there, right? I only have my story with them, and I assume that there's probably 2 kids in every city in the whole world that were just like us, right? That would have a similar story to tell, but getting those guys on board gave just, an insight that was invaluable. It was just, it was great.
Yeah, and I guess it's not your typical like band biography.
No.
Which is what makes it feel special. Because
Thank you.
It feels very personal. Like it's like, well,
Yeah.
one, it's your actual story of going there too, but like your thoughts and your feelings about Leatherface, like how the music makes you feel, how the lyrics make you feel, like
Mm-hmm.
it feels zine-like in some ways.
Thank you. Yeah.
And yeah, it's a really cool book.
Well, thank you so much.
I would not say go into it expecting like a full band bio, because that's
Yeah.
not what happens in the book.
Mhm.
And you're right. It would have to be like Frankie would have to write that book,
Which it's never going to happen.
Right.
Yeah, it was very intentional when I decided that I was going to do it, when thinking about what angles, everything, all the green lights said it has to be personal. And I know that's probably not going to be for some people, but it was just the road that felt most natural. And because that band, they dig in hard and they're very emotional, and they just they kind of hit on a level that I don't think many bands do. And so it just felt right to then make it personal, and just, man, I just love talking about that band.
So when you chose to put this together, where did that start? Because part of the travel aspect of the book is like you in the UK in like 99.
Yes.
So like back then, were you just thinking one day I'll write a book about this, or was that more of a retroactive thing?
There were so many. This book came up in my brain many times, and the first time that it did was on that trip, because as the trip neared the ending, I could see, in my head, I'm thinking, this is just going to make a pretty good story one day. And the storm at the end, just this natural climax, like the story seemed to flow like many of the stories that I read, and having Leatherface wrapped up in it was, that was the very first inclination. But it was during COVID when at some point I had some time on my hands because my shop was closed, and I thought I might write something. But at the same time, I remember the night that I was sitting there, and I said to myself, I wish that I could just order a Leatherface book online right at the moment and have it come tomorrow, and because I'd like to read that right now. And I started digging around, and apparently somebody wrote something at some point, but it was very, it didn't do anything. It just, and I don't know what that was, but so I just decided that I would try and see what happened.
Yeah, there is a natural ending to that story, your travel story, because I feel like you could read the travel story alone and like not even be familiar with Leatherface and still get a lot of enjoyment out of the scenarios that you have in that story. Like,
thank you.
The storm is harrowing. Like that's like oh wow, that is.
It was the craziest storm I'd ever seen.
That story's intense. The story about going to Northern Ireland and just the like eeriness that you guys felt the whole time was really riveting. And then just the story of you on the train with the knife, like cutting yourself on accident, like so many times. It's just like this whole travel side of the book alone would make just an excellent like travel memoir.
Thank you. I still have that knife, actually.
Is it still as sharp as it was then?
No, I've learned my lesson. And it's funny that you say that, because actually the first version of this book, the first draft, was almost without all the essays from musicians, and it was very purposeful. I was like, I want to write a book that, because sometimes I do admittedly get bored of just your typical band bio. So I wanted to do something a little bit different from the beginning. But in the very beginning, the mystery of that band was preserved in the book. They were just in the background. And I thought that was super cool. And my agent was the one actually who read it. And he's like, I like it. But he's like, there has literally been 4 million books written about travel. But there's this band you talk about in the book, throughout the book. And I admit that there's something very intriguing about that band, and you should pump it up a little bit. And so I said, okay, I'd love to do that. Yeah. So that's when I talked to Frankie and really started, asking permission and all that.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me, there's a fiction book, I think it's called like The Alternative Hero.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exactly sure. It's by a UK author, I think Thornton, I believe is the last name.
Okay.
But the book is about this guy who is basically obsessed with this UK Britpop band. Like, it's a fictional band, but he's obsessed with this band, and it's kind of like, it's his life story, but then in some ways he gets to like interact with the band.
Yeah.
And like reading this reminded me of that book, which I think I should really look up the name of that author, because it's a really fun book.
I'd be very interested to know that book.
And it's full of like references of like real Britpop artists, and it's like a high fidelity kind of book.
Yep.
But also there's some elements of it. Tim Thornton was the author of it.
Okay.
Which is, I guess, he's like a failed music fanzine writer.
Okay.
And so it's kind of about his experience, like getting in touch with this book. And I think that guy is also a musician, but I'm not sure what band he played in. But he's written a few books. But that book, I kept thinking of that book when I was reading this one, and it was kind of not. There's some parallels to it. That's a fiction novel, of course, but there's definitely some similarities there. But
I like those types of books that toe the line a little bit and blur the line.
Yeah,
I think it's neat. Yeah.
And yeah, I highly recommend everyone check it out. If you're a fan of Leatherface, definitely check it out. One thing you did mention, though, the mystery of Leatherface and how like so many people didn't know really anything about them. And because when I got into Leatherface, it was a case of people I knew who knew the band, like knew their music, and was like, you should listen to this band. They are a huge influence on bands I love, like Hot Water Music and Dillinger 4. Like, those are like some of the big bands in the US who were always championing Leatherface when most people didn't know who they were here in the US. So even though I got into them much later, it'd been like the 2000s, like late 2000s, I would have gotten into them. They were still slightly mysterious, even at that stage, even with the internet and everything, where we could look stuff up about them. It's almost as if their impact and who they influenced and just those records alone were far more important than the actual story of the band, I guess. I don't know how to describe that, but
yes,
just having those records and being able to listen to them, it's like the story would be interesting. Like, I am always curious about it, but even if they were still a mystery for the rest of time, it's still, those albums are magical. Yeah,
and especially in a world that's becoming less and less like that, they do still preserve that. I think part of their power is their mystery, and from that time where it was almost better not knowing everything, and you could kind of make it up in your head a little bit. Like the first time hearing Mush, and you wouldn't. I didn't know how to find a picture of them, but I just like what you said about me, right? I had this image in my head of like, who are these guys, man, and what do they look like, And that's actually, it's funny that you mentioned that right off the beginning, because that's a bit about, that happens in the book as well, right? When I finally sit down with Stubbs in a pub, and it's like, it's not at all what I thought.
Yeah, it's a really fun book, and you really do capture that mystique that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And even when you're trying to like tell people about them, they're still mysterious, and which I guess, I wonder if that's by design. Maybe they're kind of like that.
They are secretive people, and I don't know. It's a long story, and I'm still yet to understand everything, and not sure if I want to understand everything. But I do know that they weren't in it for. It's like one of the only true bands that I've ever known. Like they weren't in it for any other reason than to make music and put it out there, and everything else that came along with it, putting yourself out there and interviews and all of that just didn't really matter to them. It was like, let's just play music, go play shows, and that's it,
Yeah, they I guess rejected that celebrity side of it.
Absolutely.
It's like, this is just pure artistic expression.
Absolutely. And part of you gets upset at that, It's like, I think about it so much, but it's just had to be the way that it's had to be. And, there's stories, right? Davey Quinn talking about them walking off stage at Warped Tour. They're just like, we don't belong here. It's not our place,
Yeah.
And it's scary to think about. I don't know many people that would do that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like most would just grind it out and just do the
Yeah,
whole
they're
tour,
just like, that was whatever it was, and let's go drink some beer and get out of here. Yeah.
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 Yeah. There is really something special about that band, because even now I still feel like when I listen to their records, I just feel, I don't know, connected to it. It hits me just right in a way that not a lot of other bands do. And yeah.
I think it's because of the amount of emotion in some of those records, and a vast array of it as well. It covers a lot of ground. It's not linear. It is, especially records like Mush, right? You have hope in there. You have like a seething anger that is like, it feels just so real and justified, but it's also it's a bit more intelligent, it's a bit more grounded or something. And there's happiness, there's like sadness. It's all in there. It's all in there. And I've never heard a record like that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll talk about Leatherface a little bit more.
Sure.
As listeners will know, we're talking about Leatherface today. So you read the title, you know what we're talking about. But anyway, I highly recommend people check it out. The book is excellent. Do you know if they've read it? Any of the band members have read it?
Well, so I sent Frankie a handwritten letter, and that was probably the greatest thing I could have done. He's a tough one to read sometimes, and he really keeps to himself. And he wrote me an email back, which was the longest email I've gotten from him. And he was so happy that I wrote him this long letter explaining myself and what I tried to do and why I tried to do it and everything, I put it all in there. And he was very thankful. And then he said, I want to read it, but I'm not going to, not yet. And he's like, I might someday, but he doesn't like reading things about himself, or about the things he did. I don't think. It's hard to tell, really. But
Yeah.
but I kind of knew that. I could kind of put the pieces together that maybe he was that type of person. And I think Graham has read it, but I haven't talked to him in a little bit. Davy Burden read it in one night. You
Wow.
know,
Yeah.
I was like, what? All that work? He's like, I couldn't stop. He's like, he made me. It was so touching, you know. Davy Burden is the best, man. And he wrote, and he was just like, I laughed, I cried, I laughed, cried. You know, he's a great human.
The emotion that, like, reading it, like, I got that. I had those similar, like, emotional moments. Like, there's stories that are hilarious in there, and then there's stories in there that's just like that. It hits you like emotionally because it's just like, especially stuff about like Andy Crichton, you know, that kind of stuff. Like that stuff's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But like even just the just talking about seeing them live, because I never got a chance to see them live.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so just reading about those, you know, what it was like to see them live, hits me in an emotional way too. Like their music does. Their music just like, I will get a nice like burst of emotion whenever I listen to like Mush or one of their other records. So yeah, I definitely got that out of reading the book too. So you captured I feel like you really captured the heart of what makes Leatherface so special with that book.
Thank you. That means a lot to me.
Well,
I mean, I think like Austin Lucas, Abigail Lucas put it, that there were many bands that their records didn't do them justice. I don't necessarily agree with that one on Leatherface, but I do understand their sentiment when saying that the power of watching that band live was,
yeah.
Whoa. Yeah.
Well, let's move on with, I guess, the rest of the show. So the basic premise of our show is we tend to assign a guest a year, and then they choose the album for us to talk about. With this, you actually sent me a list of records that were kind of from like different periods, and you initially wanted to do Mush, and I had to break the news to you that unfortunately we have previously covered that record.
It's like, could I just talk some more about that album?
So you sent me a few other options, and I don't know if you still have that list in front of you, but
yeah, kind of. You know what's cool is because I haven't had a whole lot of time lately, but I did listen to your the Misfits episode that you guys did, and just like talking about Earth AD, and I really had a great time listening to that. You guys had some interesting things to say about it. It was fun. Did I hear your dad knew Danzig?
So Dylan, you want to tell it?
Well, he met him. He went to see Danzig, and he was
signing
like,
somewhere.
there was like a signing.
Oh, wow, okay.
I guess before the show, probably before the show.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was at the venue or if it was at a different location, but like he went and I don't know if we told this story, but like he said that Danzig like wouldn't look up at anyone. He was just like hunched over the table, and just like kind of like not talking to anybody, just like signing whatever they handed him. And so like, so like our dad like squatted down to like try to get at eye level with him, and he's like, I don't think he liked that. But like he tried to talk to him about comic books because he's like, he knew Danzig was like into comic books and he was thinking like, you know, like Wolverine stuff, you know, the stuff, Marvel stuff from that time period,
Right.
80s or whatever. And then, but he just like, Danzig just like rattled off all this like obscure like manga and just like stuff that like my dad had no context for. He didn't know what he was talking about at all. And then he was just kind of like, oh, okay.
Okay, then.
And then just kind of like set
Thank
up
you,
and
Glenn.
got the signed records and took them. But he still has those signed records. But yeah,
Wow, that's a great story.
but yeah, my mom and dad saw Danzig
No
with
way.
who else was on it? It was the tour was Danzig, Marilyn Manson, Korn.
Korn. Yeah.
I don't
Whoa.
think anybody else, but
There might have been a local, but yeah, that was
Yeah.
the tour package. Because I remember when like Korn was like blowing up and like getting on MTV a lot.
Mhm.
I had a friend who was really into Korn, and then I had a passing interest in the band.
Mhm.
And then my mom told me, she's like, I saw Korn once, and I was like, what? How? And then she's like, they opened
Oh,
for
yeah, with
Danzig.
It's
Whoa.
funny. Our mom probably saw Korn before her sister, and Korn is our aunt's like favorite band. Probably still favorite band to this day.
Whoa.
Like, because she got really into them, and when they kind of like blew up, and because she was listening to alt radio, and
Pretty
so she
fun.
like she would have seen Korn, and like she went to Ozfest, and our cousin sent me a picture of her a few years ago where she's probably early 60s now. She was like 60 at the time.
Yeah.
He sent me a picture of her with a black eye that she got in the mosh pit seeing Rob Zombie.
Oh my God. Wow. Fun family.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you listening to that episode. I always wonder what people think some of our opinions will be on some of the more classic artists, I guess.
It was cool. I learned something that episode too. It's like, whoa, I didn't know that, Just that some of those songs had been written for the one after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
The band after why does it escape me? In between.
Sam Hain. Yeah.
Yeah, Sam Hain. Yeah. I had no idea. So yeah, thanks for that. It's cool.
So the list of records that you sent me, I have it pulled up in front of me as
Sure.
well. And we had actually covered two of them as well.
Mhm.
You mentioned No Control by Bad Religion
Mm-hmm.
and the 59 Sound by the Gaslight Anthem. And we
Mhm.
have previously covered those records. But if you wanted to say anything about either of those records, the floor is yours.
I mean, I just love them. I think they're great.
You also suggested New Day Rising by Husker Du, which
Mhm.
would be a fun one to do. That's one of the ones we haven't covered by them. We've
Oh,
covered
cool.
a couple records by them. We've done the very first records, Zen Arcade, and Flip Your Wig, I think. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah,
There's
New
not
Day
much-
Rising's one.
Not much left of Husker Du, which we just talked about that like last week recording, because we talked about Minutemen record from the same year,
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
and we were saying like, oh, New Day Rising would be like, it's one of the last couple of Husker Du records we could do. It's also like 85 that year, like, which we talked about last week. We're kind of like getting low on records to pick from that year, but
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, it's one of my faves for sure.
And then you mentioned two that I was really unaware of. Man Afraid, their complete
Mhm.
discography, and Heartless Bastards, Stairs and Elevators. And
Mhm.
I know nothing about really either one of those bands.
Well, I don't know a whole lot about them either, besides they're just really good. I mean, I know a bit about Man Afraid because that stuff hit me pretty hard when I first heard it. I really, really loved it. I still do,
So the record we are covering today was released in the year 2000. And what we like to do is to at least look at some of the other records that came out that year that are notable. So Dylan, why don't you take a look at this and start us off here?
let's see. I don't remember which records we have covered from this year.
Oh, let me do that. Let me pull up our list of previously covered albums from the year 2000.
Did we do that Q and Not You record?
Let's see. We've done one of their records. Let's see.
I think that's the one we did.
All right. Most recently, we did Warning by Green Day. That was episode 310. Episode 272, we did Swagger by Flogging Molly. 239, we did Conspiracy of One by The Offspring. Episode 185, we did the Tragedy self-titled record.
That's a great one.
Episode 127, yeah, we did Q and Not Use, No Kill, No Beep Beep. Wow, we've done 2000 a lot. Episode 101, we did Relationship of Command by At the Drive-In. Episode 52, we did Pay Attention by the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. And we did One for All by Born Blind way back at episode 14. So yeah, we've hit 2000 quite a few times.
Yeah, it's a good year. There's lots of fun stuff.
Something that jumps out to me on the front page of Ray Music, Jupiter by Cave-In came out, which is the space rock record, where they were more of a Converge style technical metalcore band prior, mathcore band prior. They decided to go in a completely different direction on Jupiter, and I think Jupiter's a fantastic record. I think that could be an interesting one to talk about at some point on the show and kind of dig deeper on. We haven't done any Cave-In records though.
Nope. That'd be a good one.
That they're the hardcore record prior to Jupiter, and then Jupiter would be the two that I would say like we should talk about at some point on the show.
Yeah.
I don't know that I actually prefer. It's almost like an entirely different band. It's a complete apples to oranges situation. Some other records that kind of stand out to me. Maybe I'll Catch Fire by Alkaline Trio.
Really love that one.
It's a pretty significant record.
Mm-hmm.
Designing a Nervous Breakdown by The Anniversary is great. Definitely one of my favorites of that Midwest emo lane.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they're a band that has like been influential to certain bands, but not enough people really cite them directly. And I feel especially that record, there's still plenty to kind of go back to. But Automatic Midnight by Hot Snakes is an excellent record.
Very good.
Well,
yeah, there's a few. That Rancid 2000. I really love that one.
As a Canadian, do you have a stance on the Weaker Thans, Left and Leaving?
I mean, I like them.
Yeah.
I like them more than I did, and I liked them more after I saw them live. And once I started digging through the discography more and spending more time with it, then I did discover a record that I really like, although the name escapes me at the moment. But it's really good. Yeah. How about you?
For the Weaker Thans?
Yeah.
Absolutely love them. One of my, personal all-time favorites. We've covered them. We only covered them properly once. We did Reconstruction Site.
That one. That's the one.
Yeah.
Really
that was
love
like they kind of blew up on that one. Like that got a lot more attention and press than they'd had before.
Mm-hmm.
But Left and Leaving is my personal favorite Weaker Thans record, and the one I go to the most often.
Yeah, it's they're pretty cool. I really enjoyed them live. I saw them at a festival in Toronto. Whether it was Riot Fest or Turf, I can't remember. Maybe Turf. Yeah, summer day, Weaker Thans, cold beer. It was lovely.
If we wanted to keep it in the inspired by Leatherface category, Dillinger 4 released Versus God that year, which excellent album. I love that record.
Me too.
Is there a Hot Water Music record in 2000? I don't think there
must be.
I can't remember. Let's see. I haven't seen them yet on these charts.
No, it's in between because No Division was 99 and A Flight and a Crash was 2001.
Right.
So
Gotcha.
we're between Hot Water Music records at the time. There is a Sam I Am record. Astray came out in 2000. Which is,
I really like
record.
that one. Yeah, that's a classic.
That's been my favorite. I think that's my favorite Sam I Am record.
Oh yeah, 100%. Mine too.
Kind of for a while.
That first song off of it, Sunshine, I think.
Oh yeah.
Huge chorus. Huge chorus.
I think, and this is a good time period for that, kind of where a lot of Leatherface's influence is really like building. Kid Dynamite's Shorter, Faster, Louder comes out 2000. That's definitely in the same world of Leatherface fans making music.
Which is almost a genre in of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. 2000 it's a good blending of different genres too. Like I feel like we're converging on a couple different things happening at the same time.
Yeah, it's a turning point, it seems.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of like pop punk, lots of more termed like ordcore, a little rough around the edges, but still catchy. Lots of metalcore, lots of like garagey type stuff. Emo's got a really strong foothold here too.
Mm-hmm. That was a time when I was listening to. It was cool that you mentioned Tragedy. I was really diving into that stuff around that time, and the other bands that went along with them. I think it was similar members, like From Ashes Rise.
Yeah.
And His Hero's Gone. All like that little circle of hardcore. Really, I was feeling it. It's pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot in the year 2000, so I feel like we could go on for quite a while about this record or these albums. But let's get into the album that we are talking about today. So Released in the year 2000, we are discussing Horsebox by Leatherface. And I have a couple stats on the band. Leatherface from Sunderland, UK. They formed in 1988, and this album was released June 13th, 2000 on Better Youth Organization, aka BYO Records. And this is their 6th full-length album. And the person on this album is David Turtlewax Burden on bass, Andrew Spectrum Lang on drums. Is it Leighton?
Yes.
Leighton Evo Evans on guitar, and Frankie Warsaw Stubbs on guitar and vocals. All the nicknames were in the liner notes, so that's why I said them. And it was recorded by Fred Purser, who was also a member of some 70s like new wave of British heavy metal bands, Penetration and Tigers of Pantang.
Whoa.
And he had also recorded artists such as Toy Dolls, Cockney Rejects, Red Alert, and China Drum. So there's a little deep history there of some UK punk bands there. But we'll save the rest for later. Out of all the options that we had to discuss, what made you choose, and I think I know the answer because it's a pretty big part of the book, but what made you choose Horsebox for us to talk about?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hard to be subjective when talking about what my favorite album from 2000 is, because I am just emotionally, my heartstrings are sort of attached to that album. So it, like a tattoo can be a photograph. That album is a photograph for me, and one where I just feel a lot of things when I listen to it. So yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you care to give away any part of the book about that, but if you want me to, I'll cut it. But I
don't mind.
You were present for part of the story of Horsebox. There's a part in the book where you're watching the band. They're rehearsing, right? Like they're not in studio,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And they're playing new songs that haven't been released yet, and the songs would later wind up appearing on Horsebox.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you told me let's do this record, and I got to that part of the book, I was like, oh, I know why he wants to do that record, because he was not present for the recording, but it was such a big part of that trip for you that it makes total sense why you'd want to discuss this one.
Well, I would be, if it's more fun for you to get off the Leatherface, I would be happy to talk about any of those other albums. I just, I love this one, obviously. Yeah, it was pretty cool, and it was unexpected. It wasn't planned. Going to meet them for rehearsal was something that hadn't been discussed, and it was just by chance. We were on our way back to Laney's place from visiting Jason's family, and David Burden gets on the bus. And it's just like, what? And he just invited us to a rehearsal the next morning. So that's what we did, and that was very special. That's when that was a moment. for sure. And I think I feel like it comes across in the book as that. It's, at first almost disappointment to learn that, like, oh, we weren't going to get to hear, Pale Moonlight in that setting. But the second we realized they're writing new songs, it was just so exciting. And the first one, Sour Grapes, man, it just, hard to describe how I felt. I don't know if I did it justice in the book, but I think it's just too complicated of an emotion to convey.
Let's see. We can do a little bit of our personal backstories with Leatherface. Dylan, let's go first.
Yeah.
Do you remember when you first heard Leatherface, first got into them, all that stuff?
I don't know if I heard the name a bunch of times first, or if I just kind of like fell into their music pretty rapidly. Like I feel like with Leatherface, it's something I've been thinking about as you've talked about the book, and as we've like built up this conversation, is just thinking like Leatherface as a band feels like a manifestation of something. And like I think there's so much of that about like the mystery of the band, but even to like my own personal experience of listening to them, where it's like there's something really unassuming in like how they come across, and I think how most people kind of like get into them, and they just are like, it feels like maybe there's offhand comments of like, oh, Leatherface is this influential band to like hot water music, and I'm sure that's part of the context of how I first heard them. But it wasn't like an overbearing, like, oh, you like hot water music, you must listen to Leatherface. It's kind of just like comes up and seems like something that just came up in conversation. And I assume it's probably like I heard their name maybe a couple of times, and then it was just like you were like, hey, listen to this record. And I probably listened to Mush, and it was like, this is incredible. Exactly when I first heard them, 2009, probably. It would have been college. I would have just like kind of downloaded their stuff and some of their stuff, records, or maybe even just had Mush, for the longest time, and then or maybe a few other songs. But I don't feel like I had like ever any one like deciding turnkey moment with Leatherface. They're just like a band that I have like absorbed over a very long period of time, and there's just a mystery, like we said, they are kind of just a mystery. I think even my own personal history with them is just mysterious and not well defined. And like I would say, like, Mush is like a 5-star band, and the BYO split with Hot Water Music is like one of the greatest splits of all time. And everything else that I've heard by them, I'm like, Mush has that particular resonance to it.
Yeah.
But like, I think Cherry Knoll is fantastic. I think Fill Your Boots is fantastic. I think Minx is, like Mush just kind of like became probably the touchstone for most people. And it's like kind of the introduction for me and why it's the one I've come back to the most. But then like listening to Horsebox this week, I'm like, I know I've heard this record before. Listening to it this week, I'm like, why am I not listening to Horsebox as often as I listen to Mush? Sour Grapes is probably one of the best songs they ever wrote. It's fantastic,
Yeah, the chorus is just, it's tops.
And just like it being a less familiar record for me in their discography, even still, like listening to it, I'm like singing along, as much as anyone can confidently sing along with the words.
Yeah.
By the second chorus,
It's cool that you say that just that whole bit about like, well, why haven't I been listening to this? Because I've had those moments too. It's you always kind of go back to the benchmark, but it's they really do. There's something that just it grows on you. It sort of embraces you with that band, and after a while, you're like, oh, I get it a lot.
I was trying to think of when I would have first heard them too, and I think it comes down to when just some friends recommended them. They were a band that I read about, like I knew their name, and I saw that they were like a big influence on bands that I loved. And it would take people that I know being like, oh, you should listen to Leatherface, listen to Mush specifically. That was always that's kind of the record I think that everyone should start with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember listening to Mush and being like, this is great. Like I loved it. But then I didn't really like go outside of Mush for a while. It took me a minute to really listen to the other records. I think it's just because Mush is just that good that it's like, I mean, I'm sure the other stuff's good too, but I haven't had my fill yet of Mush, you know?
Yeah.
It's like you just eat and eat off of it, but like never get full. It's like air. And
that's very much the experience I've had with Mush. It's in a category with certain records like, it's funny that the first, which Weaker Than's record was that in 2000?
Left and Leaving. It was
Left and Leaving. This is just the second one.
Yeah.
But like the first Weaker Than's record is like, you know, I've talked about before, like Fallow by Weaker Than's is the one I had for a couple of years. You know, like a year or two prior. Like I had to fully absorb that record before I could move on to something else by them. And I feel like Double Nickels on the Dime by the Minutemen, Zen Arcade by Husker Du. It was like, those are records that like, it was kind of just that one for me for like a solid year before I moved on to anything else. And there's just something about certain bands that just like, they put so much into a record.
I think with Mush, it definitely was where it was recorded, you know, Greenhouse in London, and that they had a good budget and the studio was great and Lawrence Bell was all over it. And I've often actually entertained many times of if I had the power to change like Fill Your Boots and Minx to the recording that Mush is, would I actually do it? And for a while, I probably would have said yes, because it would have made them like, those songs are just as good as Mush. They're just recorded differently, and where they don't come across quite the same. But man, if they were, they would have been like a powerhouse. It would have been almost too much to handle. But like over the years, I've changed my tune on it, where Minx has just become, I almost like it more than Mush, because it's just, man, it's so nice. And like, I don't know what it is. There's a different power happening. And then you realize that every record has its own personality, and you just have to spend a little bit of time with it to understand it, you know? And Horsebox was no different. When I first heard the recording, it was tough for me because I had the memories of, you know, the jam space. But then I was like, oh yeah, it's just another Leatherface record recorded differently and has just as much power in there, you know?
Yeah, and I think so. I listened to Mush. I knew that one, and then I can't remember which came first. Either Stormy Petrel came out, or I was doing a series where it has to be. It actually might have been the same year now that I think about it. I was doing a series where I was looking back at like albums that were turning 30, and I was looking at albums from 1990, and in that I just deep dove and listened to tons of records that came out that year, and Fill Your Boots was in 90. And they had a couple EPs that came out that year too, like Beer Pig and Smokey Joe, I think, came out that year, and then maybe something else, like maybe a split with someone else came out that year. And I listened to all of that, like for this basically a blog post. It was
Yeah.
just for me, my own little personal musical project that I was doing. And that's where it became, oh, I love Mush too. Oh, I love Leatherface. Like once I like dug into the other records and was like really hearing everything else they had done, like that Fill Your Boots is the one that kind of like flipped the switch to beyond just the one album to listen to by them. Because there's some artists that I like that, I only listen to like the one record, but
Yep.
then there's others, so I devour the entire discography. So yeah, Fill Your Boots is the one that flipped the switch for me. And Stormy Petrol probably came out that year. It's probably what happened. And then I got into that one. And then I think I got into all the 90s stuff pretty quickly. The later, like the reunion stuff, that's the stuff I had the hardest time because it wasn't like readily available online. So like that's the stuff that I got to last would be like this record, Dog Disco, and maybe The Last, even though that came out a couple years earlier. But that actually The Last might be the record I've heard the least out of all of the Leatherface albums. But
It's a weird one, because it's not a full length and it's not an EP, so it leaves you sort of feeling a little unsatisfied. But there's that song Daylight Comes, whoa, powerhouse.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely a band that has no bad records. Like, and I can't say that about every band I love. Like Superchunk is probably my all-time favorite band. I don't like their first record at all. Like it's just so raw and rough and not what they do. Or even like Teenage Fan Club, like their second record, The King, all improv record. No, that's not for me.
It happens, right? Like it isn't like NoFX first record. It's pretty like what? Like, it doesn't sound like them at all. Like it's so weird.
Especially bands with like really big discographies. How some of that early stuff sounds nothing like what they're most known for. Yeah. But yeah, Leatherface just became an all-timer. Just a band that I love and one that I've never gotten tired of and can listen to at literally any point. Like today I listened to all of this record and I went back and listened to the Hot Water Music split, their side of the split, and then I started Dog Disco and then we had to record. But I can just like back to back all their records easily.
Yeah.
Let's do a little tiny backstory leading up to this point. So the band initially forms, like I said, in '88. It's Frankie Stubbs and Dickie Hammond. Dickie was playing in a band called HDQ, which excellent band. If you like Leatherface, listen to HDQ. Excellent. They released their debut album, Cherry Knoll, in 1989. They follow that by Fill Your Boots in 90, Mush in 91, and Minx in 93. And then the band would wind up breaking up following Minx in 1993, but they had gone in the studio and recorded The Last prior to breaking up, and that was released in 1994. And so then they go a number of years before they get back together. Between Leatherface stints, Frankie played in two different bands, Pope and Jesse, and they did some solo work as well. And after the passing of their bassist, Andy Crichton, they decided to get back together. And with this version of the band, it's not quite the same people. So David Burden, he is one of the many bass players that Leatherface had. Like that is the role they replaced the most times. He joined for the Hot Water Music split, and Leighton joined the band because Frankie. I'm blurry on this part of the story. So did Frankie he didn't want to come back initially? Is that what? Because he has some writing credits on the Hot Water Music split, but he doesn't play on it, right? It's Leighton.
Who's that, Leighton?
Yeah. And then
I think Leighton's first entry into that world was Jesse.
Yeah.
And so that's when he first met Stubbs, and he toured with Jesse, and during that he witnessed the rebirth of Leatherface and was just in that circle then from that point on. Yeah.
So did Dickie? He didn't really want to do it full time. Is that what happened there?
I don't know the whole story, but Dickie was at some point became, I think, just relationships, lifestyle, all a bit volatile. Mm-hmm. And Dickie was in and out. Like Dickie's on the Hot Water split. Mm-hmm. He helped write the songs, but then left. and then didn't return until Stormy Petrel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the first full album they have done post reunion. And I think that's kind of like the big beats of the story leading into it. And then they stuck around for a couple more years. And then there's a big gap between Dog Disco and Stormy Petrel. I don't know if those were like a full breakup or just more of a general like not doing anything inactivity period. But
yeah, they like their gaps.
Yeah, they've got a couple notable gaps in their discography. Yeah, that kind of gets us up to this record. So I do think it's pretty interesting that we are talking about a record that does not feature Dickie Hammond, who is like pretty big piece of the Leatherface sound. And that being said, they don't lose that sound on this record. Like, it's still a Leatherface album, and it sounds like a Leatherface record, even if Dickie's not here.
It's funny that you say that, because I remember hearing the recording for the first time and just thinking to myself, what's changed? What's different? And I couldn't figure it out at first. And it's like, oh, it's because I was kind of just oblivious back then. I was like, oh, right. Dickie is not on this. It took me a minute to sort of put that together. And it was like, oh, so that is the thing in my head, that strange, almost just sonic. It's subtle, but and then you hear it again on Stormy Petrel. You're like, oh, right. But you're right. There are still like Leatherface songs, but yeah, maybe the guitar noodling is not quite the same.
Yeah. That was the part listening to it. I was like, well, I mean, I guess Frankie is the one who kind of does that. I don't know how you describe that particular like style of riff that appears in a lot of Leatherface records. It's almost like it's like a muted sort of
it's like
plucking thing.
Palm muting and all that type of thing. Yeah.
And that to me feels like, okay, that's Frankie's like signature sound that you hear on all the records. You hear that in Jesse and Pope as well. Like, you hear that sound too. But you're right. There is something about the way that Dickie plays guitar that's just different enough that you don't hear it on this album. And it's, I can't even really describe what he does so differently. Because like I listen to,
well, you'll hear it on Mush, right? Like the guitars are just insane, And
I guess a good way to like A/B test so that people could like see what it is that each does, like listen to like a Jesse record or listen to that Meditation album, and then you can hear what the things that each of them does, and then when you combine it together, it's beautiful. It's such a good sound. Yeah,
I think, and I don't know for sure, but my thoughts is you have Frankie, who's so influenced by the Police and other things like that, and even like Joy Division and all that kind of stuff, real like pop sensibility, and then you have almost a classical, like he's really amazing at picking, but then you have Dickie, who was really, as far as I know, really influenced by the American sound. So real like Dag Nasty style. And so you just put those together, and it was a very interesting and perfect marriage.
It's really, the guitars in Leatherface are kind of one of a kind. And I think it's, maybe this is apocryphal. I think they've maybe said something to the extent of just like Frankie and Dickie like didn't know how to play each other's parts, essentially. They just kind of like both, played not even entirely different things, because they're playing together in key really well. And there's an interesting, like, I feel like what's happening in the guitar playing on a typical Leatherface record where you have Frankie and Dickie, it's probably less noticeable, less of a factor on Horsebox, is Frankie definitely has that folky Police influenced, like palm muted arpeggio kind of thing that he does a lot. Yeah. And he kind of does it always. Like it's almost like he never really fully strums the guitar. Like even when he's singing, he's playing those kind of pluckier parts, which is not what you would expect. Like you would think like that would be a lead guitarist is doing that stuff that's a little more articulate, and it's definitely something that I've even personally picked up and like kind of carried into my own guitar playing subconsciously, and like for me, like it comes from, you know, like Husker Du or even like some country guitar playing, and like, but the Dag Nasty comparison is a good comparison to explain what Dickie's doing on the guitar, because he's also doing a lot of chuggy palm muting stuff, but it's strummier and it's more like almost more gallopy and triplet kind of like dun kind of things, where it's like it's really bizarre when you look at the songs from afar and you don't listen to the individual guitar parts to think that, like, to look at it and be like, these are two guys playing the guitar like they're both the lead guitarist and the rhythm guitarist.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how
It's a
it
good
comes
way to
across.
put it.
It's
Yeah.
because they're both doing things that would be lead parts, and they're both doing things that would be rhythm parts, or they're kind of like both just doing rhythm parts at the same time with different approaches to rhythm.
Absolutely.
Which gives the music such a like complex and weird thing. And there's a little bit of that on to Horsebox, because I think it is, you know, Frankie's distinctive guitar playing is always gonna kind of separate itself from what someone else does in the band. So I think that's kind of like an essential quality of Leatherface that like comes through regardless. But there's definitely a difference between the guitars on this record versus what, you know, Frankie does or what Dickie does on other records. You know, his guitar playing is just a little bit more distinctive than what happens on Horsebox.
I was trying to think of like how you would describe Leighton's guitar playing on this record, because it is a little bit more, to me, it feels a little more driving and a little bit more.
It's a little bit more of what you expect from a rhythm guitar part in a punk song.
And that may have been the thing that I struggled with. Going through this sort of longer hiatus without anything from them, and then this is the first thing. There was a thicker sound, and whereas the earlier records have the guitars are a little more like buzzsaw, you know?
Yeah.
They just maybe a bit more treble in them or something. And these came back, thicker, heavy. It's like you could still tell it was a Gordon Smith, but it was maybe played through a different amp, or maybe they were different studio, different recording, whatever it was. But, and also exactly what you just said, that sort of more just like, real, a bit more straight up.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is the difference between listening to like a Jesse album and listening to Mush. Like, Jesse's great. I love all those Jesse songs, but it's not Mush, and it's not Minx. It's not, Fill Your Boots. So yeah, it is like that different ingredient that makes it sound just a little different than what you're used to. But that being said, this record sounds so good. And that was one thing I kept reading. I read a bunch of reviews for this record around the same time period, and that was one of the big talking points was the production. Like almost every review brought up that this is one of their better sounding albums production wise, and part of that might just be just the gap in time between albums. But even if you listen to Dog Disco, that does seem like a little cheaper production, like maybe not as good as the Horsebox production.
If you had to put one that's not as good as the others, I feel like Dog Disco. From the cover art to it's just like, I mean, I still love it, but up against the other ones for me personally.
Yeah, I could see that. It's not as memorable as
Mhm.
some of the other records are. Not a bad record, but still,
Nope.
yeah,
Yeah.
not.
Well, and just
okay.
going back to Mush for a second, just the spirit on that record is just, you can tell that they're just hungry, right?
Mm.
And there's a bit of desperation in there too, and the way Laney's playing drums on that, I was so influenced. I used to play drums, and I was so influenced by the way that he played drums in conjunction with what those guitars were doing, and how the song was flowing. Like, they all just did exactly the right thing at the right moment, and especially that one, you can hear this, it's recorded so well that you hear both guitars really nicely. And yeah, I'll stop talking about Mush now. Sorry.
So this record, like many Leatherface albums, features 2 covers on it as well. One of them being True Colors, which is the Cyndi Lauper song, and the other is a Ship Song, which is a Nick Cave song. I really wasn't familiar with Ship Song, the original, so I can't really speak to how much they changed that one. It features piano very prevalently on this record, though, and that was actually played by the producer or the engineer, Fred.
That's neat. Yeah, I didn't know that.
But the True Colors cover is like, jumps out at you, like, oh, whoa, okay, we know this song. It's like, when Message in a Bottle pops up on earlier records, it's like, oh, okay, we're doing like a really hugely famous song right now in the middle of this record. And I read a few reviews that were like, they were down on the Cyndi Lauper song, like they were negative on the True Colors cover, and I'm like,
oh, I love it.
It's so fun. I don't know why you would be down on it unless you just don't like the song in general, but
yeah, I feel like if you don't like the song, it's got to be the reason, because it's shocking how well they do it.
They're really good at doing covers.
Yeah, they really are.
Like, really, they know how to pick them, and they know how to play them. And Frankie always sounds amazing on the covers.
Yeah,
like he just hits the notes like really well.
Because like, I wouldn't, if I were picking a cover, I wouldn't think, oh, Leatherface should do a Cyndi Lauper ballad. That's the song you guys should do.
Mm-hmm.
But they just like they fully, play the song like they wrote it.
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of I bet there's a tongue-in-cheek element to it too, to the point where they're like, it's kind of funny that they're doing this song. It's entertaining that they chose this song. It's like, they chose the ABBA song to cover.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the greatest cover I've heard.
And I think part of it is, wouldn't it be funny if we covered ABBA? Yeah, it would be. But they do it so well too.
Oh man, that song gives me shivers. It's so excellent.
So there's a little bit of the obvious choice in covers that they pick sometimes. I do think there's a little tongue-in-cheekness to it. And then like picking something like Ship Song, where it's more like, just fans, I guess, I assume, of that particular song in general.
Right, like Leatherface covering Nick Cave makes more sense.
And singing about ships.
So.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Common theme throughout so many of their records.
Yeah.
And it's funny because like we did what did we do? We did the Minutemen episode last week, and the one, like, they do a cover of Blue Oyster Cult on there, and then they do a Meat Puppets cover on there too. And they kind of did the same thing. They pick one that's a little funnier that they chose that to do, and then do more of a like, now here's our artistic approved cover here.
Which Blue Oyster Cult song?
The Red and the Black.
Oh yeah. I haven't heard that. Check it out.
It's really faithful. Mike Watt sings it, so he sounds a lot like the original version. Cool. What else did they do on there? They did. Have you ever seen the Rain? Right?
Oh, yeah.
The Creedence song on that record. Yeah.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, it's a fun record.
Go check that out.
Oh, so this might be. We'll wrap up here soon, but there's one last thing I was looking at. So I was looking on Discogs at the liner notes and like zooming in on the actual like lyrics and then like the credits down the bottom, and in the thanks section they do the thing where they thank all the bands, And they think like the obvious people, Howard Music, Dillinger 4, Discount, which I feel like Discount was kind of an interesting pick. Avail, who I don't always think of as being like Leatherface influence, but totally makes sense. Tilt Wheel, Panthro, and they thank the sound man in North Carolina, which I'm like, what is that? Who is that person that they were?
Well, they're so loyal, right?
Yeah. And then they thank the kids from Toronto, and I was like, is that you? Are you one of the kids from Toronto?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they were stoked that we hung out with them in Sunderland, but also that had just, that trip had just happened after we saw them in Buffalo. So the way it went down was we decided that we're going on this trip and we have it all planned out. And then not that long after, we learned that Leatherface is coming to the States. I think it was, I believe it was their second time, but we had not seen them. So, and we knew that they were going to be in Buffalo. And so we went to that show. And when I say we, I mean, there was carloads of Toronto kids. Like Leatherface was just so big here, and carloads just drove to Buffalo. And I think that's when they first got a taste of, they didn't know, I don't think they realized the impact that they had made. And for sure, when they got to the States, they began to realize it. But some speculated that it was that Buffalo show where suddenly they were like, okay, these people are like, they're going nuts for it. There was just a lot of love from Toronto. They made a lot of friends at that show and that are still friends with them now, So, yeah, I think that's where it originated. But, yeah, I think it's directed to, our whole circle here,
Which has to feel cool. Like, it has to be, like, as a fan of the
band. It
was
nice. Yeah, it was cool.
To be like, oh, wow. I mean, maybe you're not the specific one person they thought of, but still, you're part of that crew.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
They could feel the excitement for sure. And, even my first email to Graham Phyllis-Kirk, who has just been, this wouldn't have happened without Graham. He's just done so much to help. And he's just a lovely human. But I sent him an email, and he writes back fairly quickly. And it's a lengthy email explaining his love for Toronto. He's like, it's a place that we hold dear and to our hearts, and be honored if you want to do it,
Yeah.
He'll try to help. So, you could feel in that email how much they, when they, and I think that's coming from a point of, he wasn't with them in 1999 when we saw them, but when he came back with Dickie and they did that, a small tour here and through the States, the Wrong Bar show, as you read about, it was, I'm not exaggerating, it was through the roof. It was all time one of the greatest shows I've ever seen, because the energy in the place was bonkers. And I don't know if Graham had witnessed, for sure he'd gotten it, but maybe it was just a different type of energy that night. It was wild,
Yeah, I guess seeing them, because he probably saw them in England.
Oh yeah,
I get that kind
he grew up with them. Yeah.
So like he saw the reactions there, and I guess when it comes to them playing here, like it's fans of the band had most likely never seen them. So them coming here was massive for those people.
Oh yeah.
I did like the part in the story where they were talking about like Howard Music wanted Leatherface to be the headliner of that tour.
Yeah, I know, right?
But they were like, look, you're the famous band. You're the bigger band here. Like, people don't know us here like you do. Like, just because you're fans and respect us doesn't mean that we should be headlining over you. So I loved that anecdote in there, because it's just like, it shows the humility too that Leatherface has,
Both of those sections, like Wollard's and Reagan's, you get the fear that they had, And I love that. Like, and you can hear it when they're talking about it. It's like you could still feel it. from them. It must have been daunting for sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I saw that Panther was on. Looks like Panther was on that tour too.
Mhm.
Very interesting band too.
I actually don't know a lot about them.
They have a different sound.
I'm
They're from.
Interesting.
I don't know where. They're also from the UK, but I can't remember what part. You can tell they're inspired by Leatherface, but they don't like. They're not doing Leatherface.
Hmm.
And they're kind of like. They're interesting, like sludgier almost in some ways. Very unique sounding band. Yeah.
Cool.
I have a little bit of a little tidbit that we can throw in here. When you mentioned the Thanking the Sound guy from North Carolina, I was like, can I find that show that they're referring to in North Carolina? So I started looking, kind of Googling, eventually landed on, of course, of all places, Punks on Paper, which is a website we've mentioned previously on the show, and just for it was a project that was put together by the guy who ran Headfirst Records, who recently passed away a couple of years ago. He was like digitizing posters. John Rivera. Yep, John Rivera. He was digitizing posters from North Carolina on this website. It is now part of the UNCG. The UNC Greensboro has like basically archived it and preserved it. And I found the listing from 1999 of a show. It was Hot Water Music, Leatherface, Swank, and Glass Eater. There's no poster for the show, but it was on June 18th at Uprisings in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. That entire Leatherface set is on YouTube. Holy shit.
Oh, wow.
So you can watch that set. It sounds pretty decent. It's not the best, live recording, but it's a good shot. Frankie's wearing a cowboy hat. And in the description of the video, I haven't found the clip where this happens in the video yet, but I'll try and find it later at some point, and I recommend anyone else to go watch it who's listening to this. But in the description of the video, it has the track listing of the songs. After Peasant in Paradise, there's a little dash here that says interlude, Brawl with Sound Guy.
What?
And then the rest of the set. So
not surprised.
I haven't found what happened, but I don't know if they just like got in an argument with the sound guy, because I don't know what happened, but that's the sound guy that they're thanking. That's from North Carolina.
That's so funny.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to go watch that and see if we can find the fight. But
yeah,
you can find that whole set. Leatherface 18/6/1999 USA full set is how it's
like on video.
Title of the video. It is shot on.
Wow.
Yeah, it's filmed like kind of one camera, somebody in the back of the venue. It looks like, but they're zooming in, moving the camera around a lot.
Yeah,
let's see if I can find the brawl, but it's it's like a full set. It's like 40 something minutes long. So, but
wow,
it looks cool. I can't believe this exists, but
it's cool that you've unraveled some of the mystery. Like I love that. It's like it's amazing.
Also, Glass Eater on that show? Weird. Very weird.
It's funny the bands that they played with. It's wild. Yeah. Like you name it, Yeah. Fugazi, Bad Religion, like, Glass Eater. Yeah. There's a really good, so far my favorite footage of them is from 93 in Sunderland. It's if you Google it, just that, it'll come up. Frankie's wearing like a Sunderland jersey in it. The sound is amazing. I don't know how, but it's like they sound incredible. Like the band is just like on fire, and the sound is really good.
Well, I think our time is winding down here, so I guess we should go ahead and wrap things up. But sure. Any final thoughts on this record?
Oh, I don't know. I just love it. I think it's great. I think I really, the moment, I love it more than ever, and especially now that I'm not a scroungy punk, and I have a really good stereo. That record especially has come to life. Listening to that on a proper stereo with proper speakers, all of a sudden, it's like a whole new animal. So, yeah, get a new stereo system and enjoy it.
Yeah, it's an excellent record from one of the all-time best punk bands ever. I mean, just bands in general. Just an incredible band. And it's a snapshot to a very specific point in their run, but all points of this band is just so fun and enjoyable. So
yeah, you can hear a spark in that record because you can tell the hiatus is over and they're happy to be in the room together. And I think it comes across. And to your point with True Colors, just having a bit of fun, and you can hear although the record's heavy, you can hear there is a lightness to it. I feel, yeah.
All right. Well, I think that will do it for us. So, if we were to follow you online, where do you recommend us checking you out?
I mean, I try not to be, but I probably spend the most time on Instagram, just because I'm a tattoo artist and I have to post things every once in a while. But I also post some book things on there, and so that's at _red_beauty, which is sarcastic, obviously. But I once changed my Instagram. That's what everyone in Toronto calls me, and I once changed it, and everyone was mad at me. They were like, "What are you doing?" So I had to change it back. Anyways, that's probably where I am the most, but I'm on Facebook too, here and there.
Where should we direct people to get the book from? Because it's available in a couple different places.
Yeah, at this point, it's sort of available almost everywhere. Obviously, if you're in the UK, then I would urge you to try and buy it from Little Rocket Records. But if you can't, there's also Sounds of Subterranea, which is doing distro in Europe. But at this point, it's tricky in the UK. They had trouble getting books because there's some strikes at the docks and stuff. Like I even had Andy Crichton's daughter send me a message and be like, "I can't get the book." And I was like, "Oh, I'll send you one." But if you're in the UK there, if you're in Canada, ECW Press or your local bookstore. Local bookstore is always the best. They'll be happy to order it for you. But it does have distro in most places at the moment.
Yeah. I'll make sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. And thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really stoked to talk to you guys about it. Your show's great. If I could just mention one more thing. If you are a fan of Leatherface, they have a side project at the moment between Graham Philliskirk and Stubbs and a few other people, like from Murder Burgers and things like that. They're called Roach Squad, and watch out. Album's amazing.
Oh, okay. So this isn't out yet, right?
There's a single out.
Okay.
But
I have to look for that.
The record's coming. Yeah.
Oh man,
it's really good.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
It's
what was surprising.
Again? Roach what?
Roach Squad.
Okay.
It's like, we don't want to be famous.
Oh, that's gonna be. Well, that's now on my anticipated list of the year for sure. Yeah.
And Hugo Moody from St. Catherine's is singing. So same singer from Meditation.
Yeah.
He sounds great.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Yeah. That's cool. That's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And again, everyone check out the book. It's very cool. And we will wrap it up here. So thank you all so much for listening, and we will talk to you next time.
To order Punk, call the number on your screen. Rush delivery is available. Remember, this special offer is not sold in stores.